The three engines stared at the sign and then at each other. Sir Topham Hatt was cross.
Whatever these hooligans are, we'll be in big trouble. You three get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll get to the bottom of this.
Sir Topham Hatt then walked away. Thomas looked at his buffers. Gordon tried to comfort the little tank engine. Eventually Edward spoke.
So you've met your former self.
How did you know?
Who do you think arrived to retrieve your face?
The two engines stared at Edward.
When we arrived to save you, Sir Topham had made me swore that I would never speak of this incident to anyone. The others had some questions, especially why you both looked different when you came back to the yard. But Sir Topham had told them that you both had been rebuilt following your mishaps. The Queen's arrival couldn't have come at any better time. We both thought this would help you both ease into your normal lives again. We thought we could erase what had happened from the mines from history. But,
he paused,
we never accounted for the possibility of you both remembering or not remembering the incident at the mines. In hindsight, we didn't know what to do if you ever found out what happened. And when Sir Topham had knew about what you two were doing, well, you now know the rest. But, the shells were in the ground. Now, they're out on the rails. When I arrived to collect the van that stored your faces, I looked into the chasm. For a second I thought I could see your faces on your former shells. It was horrific to say the least. But when I was leaving, I thought I could hear voices. To come back. To save them. To not leave them to rust. I thought it was all in my mind. But I think when we removed your faces, a part of your souls was released. And now it's come back to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs.
The shed was silent. Gordon didn't know what to think. At last Thomas spoke.
Well, there's only one way to find out.
Gordon looked at Thomas. He knew what he meant.
If you are right, little Thomas, we should leave now.
I can come with you both.
Edward, you could get out.
And these spirits don't want anything to do with you. It's we they want. You interfering could prevent us from resolving whatever problems they have. I'm sorry, but it's best that only Thomas and I go.
Edward looked at the two engines sadly. He knew Gordon was right.
Be careful, you two, and good luck.
The two engines smiled.
See you on the other side.
The two engines then set off once again, towards the old lead mines. The light of the stars reflected on the cool waters of the sea as the two engines puffed down the line. It was truly a beautiful sight.
Well, at least they picked a pretty night.
Gordon chuckled. The two engines were dreadfully nervous. They soon arrived at the entrance of the mines. They slowed down to a halt. They were both horrified at what they saw. The once dilapidated giant chasm was now gone. But that wasn't what horrified them. On the track next to it were the former rusted shells of Thomas and Gordon. But instead of being greeted by smoke boxes with no doors, the shells now had horrifying faces. They were coated in rust, scars and holes protruding from their faces. Their eyes had sunken back towards their smoke boxes. The two engines scowled angrily at Thomas and Gordon. Thomas was nervous. But Gordon plucked up courage.
What do you both want? You got our attention, now what do you want with us? You want us gone, scrapped? Well, I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen. And if you dare hurt Thomas, I'll run you both off the rails and cause a sinkhole to swallow you both for good.
The shells' expressions didn't move a muscle. Their eyes instead looked past Thomas. Thomas looked and saw what they were looking at. The danger sign that sat next to Thomas had a message. It read,
To prove you are worth of living, you must pass this test. Failure to do so results in fate worse than scrap.
Thomas and Gordon looked at each other confused. Then all of a sudden, without explanation, Thomas began to move. His crew were thrown out of his cab. Thomas was horrified.
Oh no, Gordon, help me.
Gordon tried to move forwards but he couldn't. His wheels spun but he felt something was holding him back. Thomas's crew couldn't move as well. Gordon looked at the shells.
What are you doing?
The shells didn't say anything. Thomas rolled forward. Then he felt the ground move.
Oh no, not again.
The ground began to open. Thomas had his eyes shut. He felt his wheels leaving the ground, only to instantly land on something. He opened his eyes and found out that he wasn't as deep as he feared.
Thomas, are you all right?
I'm fine.
Gordon then looked at the shells. Their eyes once fixed on him were now looking past him. Gordon followed their eyes to the sign again. The message had changed. But that wasn't all.
To rescue your family, use this tool to save him. OR save yourself and leave him to rust.
Gordon stared at the sign. He saw what lay next to it. The winch. He looked at the shells and then behind him. He then looked at Thomas. He instantly made up his mind.
Driver, fireman, the winch, fasten it to me.
The crew did just that. Once the winch was secured, Gordon finally moved forward. Slowly and carefully. He dropped sand to get a good grip on the rails. Soon he was close enough. His crew and Thomas' crew fastened the winch and the strong cables to the two engines. Then Thomas' crew climbed into Thomas' cab. Suddenly the ground began to open a little. Thomas began to move forward into the earth. The opening quickly ceased.
Gordon, I'm scared. I'm sorry for all of this. This was my fault. I got us all into this mess.
Thomas, you had no idea what you were getting yourself into. And no matter what happens, I'll always be by your side. I will never let anything happen to you, little brother.
The ground began to rumble slightly.
We're out of time. Are you ready?
Yes. Heave.
Gordon heaved with all his might. His wheels thankfully didn't lose control and began to get a grip on the rails. But it was hard work. Just then the ground began to shake. The hole started to widen.
Thomas, I need your help.
Thomas's crew threw on the throttle wide backwards. Thomas' wheels spun and spun, desperately trying to get a grip on the rails. But his wheels weren't on the rails. The dirt and stones were blocking Thomas' wheels from reaching the rails. Then Gordon started to move forward. He braked with all his might, and with a mighty heave, Gordon pulled Thomas free from the dirt and stones. Thomas' wheels managed to get a grip and the two engines shot backwards just as the mine gave away. The rails buckled and collapsed. Dirt, stones and ballast sank below into the growing chasm. The two engines stopped at a safe distance and stared at where they once stood. They then looked to their left and saw their shells. This time, instead of the scowling rusty engines, what greeted them was themselves in their former glory. The two engines smiled at Thomas and Gordon.
Thank you, you freed us.
The two engines then vanished. In their place were the old rusty shells. But this time, no faces could be seen. Only where smoke box stalls should have been.
I think it's time we should take these to the scrapyard to be melted down.
Thomas could only agree, and that's what they did. The two engines didn't leave the scrapyard until their former shells had melted down completely. The two engines vowed to never speak of the mine again. Edward also promised to never speak of it as well. None of the other engines ever found out what happened. And it has remained that way. Sir Topham Hatt had a suspicion of what might have happened. But as time went on, the memory began to fizzle. And he began to forget what happened. As did everyone else. The tracks to the mine were eventually all torn up and the mine was closed off for good. The memory of the mine became weaker and weaker as time moved on. And soon the mine and the events that happened became nothing more but a lost memory.